Moment of silence where 75 years ago, destruction rained down from the sky. This is Special Report. Good evening and welcome to Washington. I'm Doug McKelway in for Brett Baer. President Obama has just wrapped up remarks following an historic meeting with Japanese Prime Minister at Pearl Harbor, 75 years after the Japanese attack that brought America into World War II. The visit followed Mr. Obama's trip to Hiroshima in May. The leaders shared a moment of silence in an all-white room where 2,400 names of the fallen reside on a wall. Correspondent Kevin Cork is on the ground at Pearl Harbor. Hello, Kevin.
Hey there, Doug. You're right, saying it was a testament to the power of reconciliation. President Obama today welcomed his Japanese counterpart to mark the solemn occasion, as you just pointed out, 75 years to the month since the attacks at Pearl Harbor. But for those who came here hoping for a direct, specific apology from the Japanese leader, well, they left wanting. It was a day for reflection and reconciliation, but not for an apology.
As the Prime Minister of Japan, I offer my sincere and everlasting condolences to the souls of those who lost their lives here.
Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe today acknowledged Japan's role in the deadly attacks on Pearl Harbor 75 years ago this month at the memorial site of the USS Arizona, but he stopped short of apologizing. Instead, Abe struck a tone similar to that of President Obama, who spoke at Hiroshima earlier this year. And while the sounds of battle have long since faded, some vestiges of the war do remain. Most notably, the security relationship that effectively calls on the United States to assume the role of protector of the Japanese empire, a role that comes at a very heavy cost to the American taxpayer, both in terms of manpower and money, something that then candidate Donald Trump called unsustainable.
I want Japan and Germany and Saudi Arabia and South Korea and many of the NATO nations. They owe us tremendous. We're taking care of all these people. And what I want them to do is pay up.
Analysts believe Trump's comments have created a level of uncertainty among leaders in Tokyo, who, like Abe, have long dealt with the complicated internal politics of America's military presence in Okinawa. But while Trump's suggestion that Japan assume more of the burden for its defense would be a departure from existing U.S. policy, experts doubt the rhetoric will alter reality.
They have common interests, they have common values, and they are threatened by a country that has challenged both Tokyo and Washington, and that, of course, is China. And I think that will be an important element of the glue that keeps these two nations marching forward together.
Still, it was Abe who was the first world leader to greet Mr. Trump after his victory in November, a sign that even if the dynamics change, the relationship, one of America's most important, will endure. Poignantly, and perhaps most importantly, the president thanked World War II veterans, many of whom were in attendance here today, Doug. Brave members of the greatest generation who will never forget that day and will certainly never be forgotten. Doug?
Kevin Cork from Pearl Harbor tonight. Thank you, Kevin. Russia is blaming the United States for some of the uptick in casualties in the Syrian civil war. Reuters is reporting tonight that Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov told Secretary of State John Kerry on a phone call that the U.S. decision to ease some restrictions on arming Syrian rebels may lead to more casualties. Rescue workers have recovered a flight recorder from the Russian military plane that crashed into the Black Sea over the weekend. Officials have not announced the cause of that crash, but they are anxious to squelch speculation that it might have been caused by a bomb planted on board or a portable air defense missile. Russia's domestic security agency has said it has found no indications or facts pointing to a terror attack or an act of sabotage. All 92 people on board that plane are believed to have died when it crashed 2 minutes after taking off en route to Syria. Israel is doubling down on their public feud with the Obama administration, saying they have ironclad information proving Washington's role in last week's UN resolution declaring Israeli settlements illegal. Correspondent John Huddy reports on the outrage from Jerusalem.
The fight between Israel and the United States over last week's UN vote is heating up. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu summoned the U.S. ambassador and, according to one official, ordered all Israeli cabinet ministers to refrain from traveling to or meeting with officials of the countries that voted in favor of the anti-Israeli resolution. Israeli officials continue to say they have evidence the Obama administration orchestrated and crafted the resolution. At today's briefing, State Department Deputy Spokesman Mark Toner tried to deflect the blame.
We did not take the lead in drafting this resolution. That was done by the Egyptians with the Palestinians.
The resolution passed 14-0 with the U.S. abstaining, breaking the long-held tradition of the U.S. shielding Israel at the UN. It demands that Israel, quote, cease all settlement activities in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem, and that the settlements have no legal validity. Prime Minister Netanyahu called it a shameful ambush against Israel by the Obama administration, but tried to find a silver lining.
I'm encouraged by the statements of our friends in the United States, Republicans and Democrats alike. They understand how reckless and destructive this UN resolution was.
Yesterday, the Prime Minister tweeted this: "The nations of the world respect strong countries that stand up for themselves and do not respect weak countries that bow their heads. But there's concern that if Israel doesn't tread lightly, there could be another resolution before President Obama leaves office that's even more binding than the one voted on Friday." A senior Israeli official told me tonight that he has information the U.S. may try to propose another resolution in the coming weeks, preempting Israeli-Palestinian negotiations. That said, Secretary of State John Kerry is expected to make remarks tomorrow about his vision for the future of Israeli-Palestinian negotiations, a speech that Israeli leaders will be closely watching. Doug?
John Huddy in Jerusalem tonight. Thank you, John. President Obama has repeatedly said that he will do what he can using a pen and a phone. Incoming President Trump may only need his phone and 140 characters or less. Correspondent Peter Ducey is in West Palm Beach, Florida, reporting on the soon-to-be tweeter-in-chief.
The president-elect plans to keep sounding off even after his swearing in. President @Real Donald Trump will not give up his unfiltered platform to reach American citizens and world leaders. And the person who will soon have to explain what the next president did or didn't mean with his tweets says it's exciting.
He has this direct pipeline to the American people where he can talk back and forth to almost 17 million people on Twitter.
That means Mr. Trump will still have a way to defend himself, like he did with this post, quote, "I gave millions of dollars to DJT Foundation, raised or received millions more, all of which is given to charity, and media won't report." And it means Mr. Trump will also have a way to go on offense when he wants to, like he did after American diplomats ignored his advice and let an anti-Israel resolution pass. That tweet said, quote, "The United Nations has such great potential, but right now it is just a club for people to get together, talk, and have a good time." So sad. That shot comes as prominent conservatives like House Speaker Paul Ryan, Texas Senator Ted Cruz, and Arizona Senator John McCain are calling for the incoming president to strip funding from an agency whose foreign policies, they say, conflict with American foreign policy. And we're talking about a lot of money. The U.S. has about $3 billion tied up in UN activities every year, $2.3 billion for peacekeeping, a quarter of the total UN peacekeeping budget, and $600 million toward the United Nations staff and infrastructure, 22% of that budget. This morning, one Trump ally suggested getting rid of the skyscraper that houses the United Nations headquarters on Manhattan's east side.
We ought to get jackhammers, and we ought to jackhammer the whole thing off, float it into the East River, ask anybody who would like to host it to come pick it up, haul it off, and it'll be a lot easier to park in Manhattan after we get rid of it.
This afternoon, as authorities in New York worked to clear Trump Tower because of a suspicious package, the president-elect tweeted from here at Mar-a-Lago, quote, "President Obama campaigned hard and personally in the very important swing states and lost. The voters wanted to make America great again." That is the latest president-elect pushback against President Obama's claim that he could have won a third term in November, except, of course, for the fact that President Obama never could have run in November because he's term limited. Doug?
Indeed he is. Peter Ducey in West Palm Beach tonight. Thank you very much, Peter. President-elect Trump's cabinet may be almost full, with only the Secretaries of Agriculture and Veterans Affairs remaining to be nominated, as well as the cabinet-level position of U.S. Trade Representative. But nominations are only half the battle. The Senate still gets to have its say through the confirmation process. Chief political correspondent Carl Cameron tells us what to expect.
While Democrats plan to grill and oppose most of the president-elect's cabinet nominees, Republicans control the majority and have few complaints.
All in all, Trump is going to get virtually everyone that he nominates. It's possible that he'll have to withdraw one or two because of problems that emerge.
Mr. Trump has tapped 5 members of Congress for his cabinet. First up for confirmation, Alabama Senator Jeff Sessions for Attorney General, who, with the express support of Senate Democrat Joe Manchin of West Virginia, appears poised to kick off the confirmation process with a bipartisan approval. Trump's pick for Secretary of Health and Human Services, who will lead the repeal of Obamacare, is Georgia Republican Congressman Tom Price, an orthopedic surgeon. Democrats don't dispute that despite their opposition, all the nominees may be confirmed.
There isn't really that much they can do other than do a lot of angry yelling.
Rex Tillerson for Secretary of State may be most contentious. The CEO of ExxonMobil has done business with world leaders, including Russian President Vladimir Putin. Some GOP hawks have so far not committed to support Tillerson till they better understand that relationship. On the other hand, Tillerson disagrees with Trump on climate change and believes it's real. Democrats like that. For Defense Secretary, former Marine General James Mattis, who retired 3 years ago, has fans in both parties. But because the law requires military men to have been retired for 7 years before serving as the civilian defense secretary, he needs a congressional waiver. For Secretary of Transportation, Elaine Chao is a near shoo-in. She's been both Labor Secretary and Deputy Transportation Secretary in prior GOP administrations, and is the wife of Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. Democrats fume over Trump's choice for Energy Secretary. Former Texas Governor Rick Perry famously vowed to abolish the agency. Likewise, Trump's choice to run the Environmental Protection Agency, Oklahoma Attorney General Scott Pruitt, has been a leading critic of EPA efforts to curb carbon pollution and sued to halt increased use of ethanol, which Trump supports. Among those committed to serve the Trump administration are at least 6 multimillionaires, including Steve Mnuchin for Treasury Secretary, and 5 billionaires, including Wilbur Ross for Commerce Secretary. Both are likely to be approved but face strict divestiture requirements to avoid conflicts of interest.
And, of course, the president-elect has his own business conflicts of interest to sort out, and he's promised to explain how he plans to do that before he's inaugurated, and that is in 24 days. Doug?
All right, we shall see. To be continued. Thank you, Carl. The Dow was up 11, finishing 55 points short of the 20,000-point mark today. The S&P 500 rose 5, the NASDAQ jumped 25. Shopping malls can get crowded and crazy this time of year, but this year, some turned violent in the midst of post-Christmas shopping. Correspondent Rob Schmidt reports that some of the brawls around the country may not have been spontaneous.
It was mayhem the day after Christmas as fists flew at a mall in Fort Worth, Texas, the teenage brawl captured on cell phone video. Local police arrived after calls of gunfire, finding a number of fights instead. Officers seen here trying to jump in and stop this melee before anyone was seriously hurt. Malls all over the country looked like this yesterday, though there appears to be no connection. This video, recorded near Cleveland, Ohio, shows more of the same. Teens all meeting at their local mall and a fight erupting, pushing, shoving, punching, and running, sending shoppers fleeing for the exits.
I seen the girl get trumbled over. Like it was scary. It was really scary for real.
At this mall in Elizabeth, New Jersey, a chair crashing down on the floor sounded enough like gunfire to cause a panic.
A small fight erupted, at which time someone slammed the chair down, causing a loud noise. Another patron yelled, "Shots fired," or "gun." At that time, pandemonium happened.
Around 8 people were hurt there. People screaming "shots fired" at a mall on New York's Long Island caused panic as well. The Fox Valley Mall in Aurora, Illinois was evacuated after fights broke out in a crowd of about 1,000 people. A police sergeant was punched in the face. 8 juveniles have been charged. At least 2 of these fights may have been coordinated online, including this one in Aurora, Colorado, which happened at the Town Center Mall after around 500 teens met at the food court. Trying to take control, one police officer said he was surrounded by an unruly crowd, and that's when the decision was made to shut down and evacuate the mall. There were 5 arrests. No customers or officers were hurt. After receiving reports of possible flash mobs, police responded to 2 different malls in Memphis, Tennessee. Many shopping centers were packed yesterday as many other stores were closed for the official weekday observance of Christmas. Doug?
Rob Schmidt in New York tonight. Thank you, Rob. Football, a part of the holiday season as much as food and shopping. But as the College Bowl season approaches the big New Year's weekend, some schools are fighting off negative press. Correspondent Mike Tobin reports from Chicago.
With multi-million-dollar payouts and national prestige on the line, critics charge the pressure to cover up a dark side of college sports is running away from us.
If we're not really concerned about who's on the field and what they've done to other students and what that says about the culture we're all participating in, I think there's a concern there.
Star running back Joe Mixon is scheduled to take the field when Oklahoma plays in the Sugar Bowl. He served a one-year suspension for bashing a woman in the face, breaking 4 bones. That was before the video got out, and the public saw the violent reality of that assault. The coach, who once supported Mixon, changed his tune.
It was, significant penalty and discipline. 2.5 years later, it's fair to say it isn't enough.
10 University of Minnesota players were suspended for sexual contact with one woman who told investigators she attempted to refuse some of their advances. Police did not charge, but the players were still suspended for violating the university code of conduct. When the rest of the team boycotted in support of their teammates, the coach backed them. Tracy Claeys tweeted, "Have never been more proud of our kids. I respect their rights and support their effort to make a better world." Now, some 400 teachers and parents have signed a petition calling for Claeys to be fired. The petition reading in part, Tracy Claeys' tweet fails to acknowledge the tragic, historic mistreatment of women, demonstrating that he is not an appropriate or effective leader for young people.
I don't have time to worry about my job. I love working with the kids, and that's my responsibility, is make sure they're prepared.
Attorney Andrew Miltenberg says there is an emotional component to what is happening here.
There's a tremendous amount of political correctness running through the university system with respect to sexual misconduct, and oftentimes athletes are being treated much worse.
It should be noted the Hennepin County attorney is taking another look at the Minnesota case with consideration for criminal charges. Doug, back to you.
Mike Tobin in Chicago tonight. Thank you, Mike. Coming up next, how the U.S. healthcare system is going to change under President Obama. But first, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox 6 in Birmingham, Alabama, where the Navy is preparing to commission the USS Gabrielle Giffords. The ship has completed testing in the Gulf of Mexico and is set to be commissioned in mid-2017. When choosing the name, the Navy cited Giffords' perseverance after being shot in the head in an assassination attempt in 2011. Fox 11 in Los Angeles, where actress Carrie Fisher, who earned enduring fame as Princess Leia in the Star Wars universe, has now died at the age of 60. Fisher was admitted to the hospital on Friday after suffering a medical emergency on board a flight to L.A. Besides her accolades in a galaxy far, far away, Fisher was an accomplished author who detailed her struggles with addiction and mental illness in several best-selling books. And this is a live look at Tampa from Fox 13. A big story there tonight is Florida lawmakers making a push for stronger laws punishing texting while driving. Right now, authorities must stop drivers for another violation to issue a ticket for texting and driving. Several bills are moving on a state level to make it a primary offense in the Sunshine State. And that's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back. Healthcare was a key issue for candidate Donald Trump, and it is set to be at the top of the agenda for President Trump starting in January. Correspondent Rich Edson examines what a healthcare fight on Capitol Hill could really mean. Good evening, Rich.
Hey, good evening, Doug. And it has been Republicans' congressional priority for years. Vote to repeal Obamacare. And the next time they pass a repeal bill, they'll have a president who says he will actually sign it into law, leading to the second overhaul of the American healthcare system in less than a decade.
And what's your name now?
Chris Schweppe runs an internet marketing business from his home in Northern Virginia. He, his wife Gina, and children Sawyer and Scarlett have Obamacare insurance. They bought a mid-level silver plan on healthcare.gov and receive a subsidy. They say some of the related costs are too high, and the system has been inefficient.
My biggest thing is it just comes down to cost. When it comes to business and family, I don't really care about politics.
The tax credit is not compensating for the increase of the premiums going up. So the tax credit is really not helping us out in terms of lowering the cost.
And their health insurance may soon change dramatically.
Hey, look, we need to get Obamacare relief to families as fast as possible.
As Republicans move to replace Obamacare, they must decide whether or how to prevent millions from losing that insurance while they draft its replacement.
Republicans in the Congress are not going to vote to take health insurance away from 20 million people. So no matter how much they talk about abolishing Obamacare, they're going to need a replacement.
They would still need to agree on how to pay for these insurance credits, whether to keep or repeal Obamacare's taxes and spending cuts, how much to give states to insure their sickest patients, and whether to maintain or scrap all Obamacare insurance reforms.
It's going to be hard to get to the finish line, settle on a single plan. They're going to have to decide what kind of subsidies they want in the individual market or for small businesses. They're going to have to decide what do they want for the equivalent of the Cadillac tax, or do they want to not have anything like that at all? What will be the insurance rules, and how do you handle pre-existing condition?
The administration says Obamacare has covered about 20 million people. It features popular provisions like allowing young adults to stay on their parents' insurance plans until age 26. It prohibits insurance companies from denying coverage and charging more money for previous illnesses. Days after Donald Trump won the presidential election, the Wall Street Journal spoke to him and reported, quote, he favors keeping the prohibition against insurers denying coverage because of a patient's existing conditions and a provision that allows parents to provide years of additional coverage for children on their insurance policies. Of those, he told the paper, quote, I like those very much. It's a lengthy list of questions whose answers will have substantial consequences for American families and small businesses.
Bottom line, I mean, small businesses are run by people that have families, and when you have a lower cost of business, you're going to be more likely to hire people. When I see my costs going up, and then I'm thinking that in 6 months from now my costs are going to be going up even further, it makes me a little scared to hire somebody to help me out.
And uncertainty about whether a Republican plan will be better than what they have now. The Obama administration says nearly 6.5 million have signed up for Obamacare coverage next year, 400,000 more than at the same point last year. An improvement, though potentially insignificant in the long term as insurance companies and their customers look ahead to what Republicans will create. Doug?
Thank you, Rich. Well, Donald Trump may want to repeal and replace, but what does that really mean, and where does that leave the U.S. healthcare system? Well, joining us now from Newton, Massachusetts, is Jonathan Gruber, an economics professor at MIT and one of the architects of Obamacare, and from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Republican Senator Dr. Bill Cassidy, who serves on the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us tonight. Happy New Year to you both.
Good to be here.
To you, Doug.
Professor Gruber, let's start with you. I know that you do not want to relitigate the past and all the controversies associated with Obamacare, but you believe the law is working precisely as it was intended to do, correct?
I believe the law is working well. It could be, any law could be working better, but I think the fundamental goals of covering the uninsured, we've covered 20 million uninsured, ending discrimination in insurance markets, not allowing insurers to discriminate against the sick, and ultimately moving towards cost control, where the cost of employer-sponsored insurance, which is what most Americans have, is $3,600 below where it was projected to be at this point. Could it be better? Sure. Lots of laws can be improved.
Yeah.
Is it worth ripping it all up? Not at all.
Right. In fact, you mentioned on CNN last October some of the changes that you would like to see. You said, and I'm quoting you, I wish the mandate penalty was stronger. The other, I wish the federal government had done more to get states to expand their Medicaid programs. What do you mean by you want the mandate stronger? What do you mean by that precisely?
Well, basically, any insurance plan, the way insurance works is people pay in when they're healthy and they benefit when they're sick. The only way to make that work is to make sure that everyone's in when they're healthy, so that the money is there when they get sick to pay out. If you have a system which does not ensure the healthy are in, then insurers will just kick the sick out and not provide them insurance. There's no alternative to that but to have an individual mandate to make sure the healthy come in the pool. Any alternative which gets rid of the mandate cannot prevent the discrimination against the sick, which is really popular among American citizens.
Senator Cassidy, you want to respond?
Well, first, for all people speak about the wonderful things about Obamacare, for 8 years the American voter has been consistently voting against politicians who support Obamacare, culminating in the election of President Trump. And it begs the question, why? If it's so wonderful, why do the voters vote against it? Because the voters are sick of people in Washington, D.C. telling them how to live their lives. They just are. And they think this gives way too much power to Washington, taking it away from the individual and from her family and from the state. As regards how do you cover other people, the Republican plan isn't a mandate with a penalty. It is that you give states the option that those eligible would be enrolled unless they choose not to be. When people turn 65, they go into Medicare. They don't say, oh my gosh, there's a mandate, I'm on Medicare. They say, I'm enrolled in Medicare. So the Republican alternatives would say, states, you can decide if someone's eligible that they would be enrolled unless they choose not to be. You make it really easy to get out, but otherwise you're enrolled. And that way you restore the law of big numbers. All those young, healthy people are actually in to help spread out the cost of those very expensive illnesses.
What we're hearing from Mr. Trump, Senator Cassidy, is few and far between, very sparse in terms of details. It's not exactly what we're hearing from the House or from the Senate about repealing and replacing. What precisely is the time frame for repealing and replacing, and what precisely do you replace it with at this point? And to that point, aren't you kind of boxed in by Obamacare? As Professor Gruber would say, you've got 20 newly insured people. How do you get rid of that?
First, I think we know the President-elect's instincts. It is for market-based reforms. That's number one. Number two, I'm a physician. I've been working for 30 years in a hospital for the uninsured. And so I take as the person I look at as that woman. She voted for Trump. She hates Obamacare, but she's got a breast lump. And she needs to make sure that in this transition, her breast lump, her cancer is cared for. As long as we keep her as the prism through which we examine this problem, I think we'll do okay. And what can we do to help her, but to transition to something more market-oriented? I believe in price transparency. If she's going to get a CT scan ordered of her breast, then she should know the cost of that CT scan before she has it done to allow her to comparison shop. If you introduce that, you actually lower cost, you give her the power. She has the power of choosing based on quality and cost, and in so doing, you expand her ability to influence her care much more so than Obamacare did.
Professor Gruber, he makes a good point about this choice, something which seems to be neglected in Obamacare.
You know, I'm afraid the senators providing the same garbage salad of empty talking points that we've heard from Republicans for years. Let's just take one simple example, price transparency. There have now been dozens of studies of price transparency, credible scientific studies. Not a single study has found that price transparency lowers costs or improves healthcare quality. Could it? Sure, it could. Many things could be true. But once again, the question for Republicans is, where's the fire? We have a law that is working to provide insurance coverage for 20 million people. They want to take it away without a credible alternative. They have no alternative. They have no proposal that has been vetted by the Congressional Budget Office and scored.
Senator, go ahead.
Well, yeah, it's not been scored, but I've actually introduced two pieces of legislation that would address this. And the studies looking at price transparency looked at like $50,000 operations. If you look at that which is most apparent, plastic surgery and LASIK surgery, where there's price transparency, people advertise on bulletin boards, on street signs. Those have actually decreased in cost over the last 10 years. So where you make it immediate, and where you make it where the person understands, give the power to the patient. Obamacare took power from her. Republicans think she should have the power. I don't know why there's such resistance on the left to that, but if we give the patient the power, good things happen. I saw that in my practice. I see it in life.
Professor Gruber, you often make the point, and many people on your side of this debate make the point that you've got these 20 million newly insured, but you never delve into the quality of the care they're getting or that they might get. And USA Today reported on May 4th of 2015, a little over a year ago, and I'm quoting here, 3/4 of emergency physicians say they've seen ER patient visits surge since Obamacare took effect, just the opposite of what many expected would happen. Why are people still going to the emergency room when they've got this comprehensive care that you're touting?
Well, first of all, remember with Obamacare, we've run the experiment once. We ran it in Massachusetts. So we've got sort of a 5-year head start in studying what happens. What happened in Massachusetts is initially emergency room visits did go up because people suddenly had more access to the system. But over a few years, as people got used to having insurance, they went down. The same thing's going to happen nationally. And the main thing to understand is that if you look at the quality of insurance that people have in the market, before Obamacare, you could, for example, have an insurance policy which said, we'll cover your first $10,000. After that, you're on your own. That's not insurance. Obamacare ended that. Okay, and many Republicans have said, well, they like ending that. They like moving to real insurance. The point is, how do we move to real insurance? How do we bring the sick into the system without having the healthy in the system? And there is no evidence that purely market-based policies are going to work. Look, I'm an economist. I'm for market-based solutions to problems when there's some evidence they work. There's no evidence it works here.
Senator Cassidy, I'll let you respond with the last word.
it's kind of amusing to hear the professor criticize policies with $10,000 deductibles. The typical bronze level of policy has a $6,000 deductible. That's an insurance plan that works. A friend of mine, no one believes me, so I put it on my Facebook page. He got his quote. He and his wife, 61, 62. Their policy is $39,000 a year, and they have $6,000 deductibles. Now, if this is a policy that works, I'd hate to see one that does not. And we indeed actually do know things at lower cost. Health savings accounts have been proved, academic studies, that when someone has a health savings account, she becomes activated, more aware of cost. If you combine that with her actually having the ability to know the cost, she receives the care she needs, but at a lower cost to both her and to society.
Gentlemen,
there
this
is
is
that academic research. The professor's a little bit wrong on that.
All right, gentlemen, this is a conversation and a debate which is going to escalate in the coming months. We'll be hearing from both of you, I have no doubt. Thank you very much. Good to see you. Appreciate your time. Coming up next, the all-star panel joins me in the studio to break down the foreign policy hotspots and how things could be different under a President Trump.
There's a lot of back and forth about the language of the resolutions, but the fact is this is an extraordinarily radical step by an outgoing American president intended to box in his successor.
I'm a bit, I wouldn't say surprised, disappointed in the volume of the reaction, because I think it fails to acknowledge the totality of this president's record, and frankly the fact that we've had a disagreement on this issue related to settlements for years, that this is not new.
Well, still resonating across the world today is the Obama administration's decision last Friday to abstain from a vote in the UN Security Council, a vote that condemned Israel for its settlements in the West Bank and elsewhere. The importance of this, regardless of whatever the Trump administration does unilaterally, is that it has now become, in effect, international law, a condemnation of the one democracy in the Middle East. Let's bring in the panel right now. Fortune magazine's Nina Easton, Matt Schlapp, contributor with The Hill, A.B. Stoddard, associate editor at Real Clear Politics, and syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. Charles, you ended on fire last night here saying that the United Nations should be emblazoned with the Trump logo and sold as condos in the aftermath of this. What else do you have to say?
Well, I'd also collect on the parking tickets of all the UN ambassadors. That could,
which is a problem,
close the budget deficit in Washington. Look, this was a blow against Israel from which it will have a hard time recovering. The Trump administration cannot undo it because it requires Security Council action, and that you can't get without the Chinese and the Russians, who will never undo it. The fact is that Americans have to really think about why we still invest, support, and in a sense sort of psychically invest in the UN, which was a great idea 70 years ago when it was an idea. But it is a complete failure, and it's a farce. 60% of its activity is devoted to reports, attacks, denunciations, and demonization of one state, the one Jewish state on the planet, a dot on the map. For example, you hear about the World Health Organization. It corrupts everything it touches, talking about Israel causing a health crisis within its territories. This is at a time when the Russians are dropping bombs on pediatric hospitals in Syria, where children there were dying for lack of medicine, lack of food in a siege, and they're obsessed with Israel. This is really a time we're going to have a lot of disruptions, a lot of rethinking of our relationships, the way we are, for example, with Taiwan and China. Time to rethink our devotion, slavish devotion, to an institution that devotes itself to attacking an ally and to undermining American interests.
A.B., this points out what Charles just said, the presumed power of Donald Trump to change this. We cannot do this resolution. I don't think we can anyway. Does he have any power to do that with the sheer power of his influence in U.S.
I think that, as Charles points out, the power is to swing influence and opinion against the UN, and that's building in the Congress, and that seems to have resonance. The problem is that we don't know what Obama still is left to do. So as you see the Israelis try to collect this evidence, they're going to show to Trump to prove that Obama both produced and provoked this resolution. This is going to be an ongoing story, as we have what we're supposed to have is one president at a time, but it's a story that Trump will relish being involved in. And again, it's not that he can undo it and get a result, but it is definitely a threat to the UN over the long term.
Matt?
Doug, why do you want to be our friend? Why would anybody want to be America's friend when this is how we treat our strongest allies? You have a president who's gone around the globe apologizing to everyone, including apologizing and reaching out his hand to the Castro brothers and to the mullahs in Iran. And that sets a terrible example to the authoritarian leaders across the globe. And then you look at how we treat our friends. And the most disgusting part of this is happening at the tail end of the Obama administration, where basically his third term was denied. And he ought to do the right thing for the country, which is that kind of just manage everything till the new president gets inaugurated, and allow the next president to try to build important relationships across the globe. And Obama's doing everything he can to bind President-elect Trump's hands, and it's wrong.
You know, last word on this before we move to other foreign policy issues.
In some ways, it was a gift to the president-elect, in that it gives him an opportunity to cement and show his support for Israel. A. B. The whole question of, do we support too much give too much financial support to this institution that is often a forum for attacks on Western countries such as ours who are funding it? That's something that's been going on for years, and I think this helps to crystallize Donald Trump's argument about not just the UN but other international institutions. Are we carrying too much of a load? But particularly with the UN, where again it does do a lot of good, a lot of peacekeeping efforts and so forth, but it does tend towards being this forum for anti-Western rhetoric.
In other foreign policy news today, just a short while ago, Prime Minister Abe of Japan wrapped up his visit to Pearl Harbor, this following 7 months ago, the visit that President Obama made to the Hiroshima Memorial in Japan. But it again draws attention to this absolutely key relationship that the United States has at a time of unrest in the South Asian Sea there in the Asian Pacific region. Here's Gordon Chang speaking about the importance of this relationship.
At this moment, it looks like that U.S.-Japan relations will continue to be strong under the Trump presidency. There are a lot of important forces that drive these two countries together. They have common interests, they have common values, and they are threatened by a country that has challenged both Tokyo and Washington, and that, of course, is China. And I think that will be an important element of the glue that keeps these two nations marching forward together.
But Charles, Japan was always included in Trump's remarks in the campaign about engaging in unfair trading practices.
Well, we've got to be very careful to look at the Japanese-U.S. relationship purely through an economic lens, purely as a matter of a trade, is a terrible mistake. One of the miraculous successes of U.S. foreign policy since the Second World War was the befriending of two terrible enemies, Germany and Japan, to the point where they're our strongest allies in that region. And we did that through incredible statesmanship of Truman, Eisenhower, and others, of course. And that is something that we have to be very careful about. If we want to talk about the balance of who pays for what, the Japanese actually pay for quite a lot of our soldiers, of that cost. I think it's more than half of soldiers in Okinawa, which causes a lot of Japanese nationalist resentment against the U.S. I would tread carefully on that. This is a region where China is the rising threat. Just yesterday, it sent its first aircraft carrier into the South China Sea. It came near Taiwan. There's a lot of trouble. I think this administration, the first 4 years of this administration, China is likely to be our biggest crisis threat, and we are going to need all the allies we can. We have no stronger ally in the region than Japan.
Out of time for this segment, but coming up next, the complicated cases for many of President-elect Trump's cabinet picks. That one we return.
We're in the process of putting together one of the great cabinets, certainly a cabinet with the highest IQ that anybody has ever. I mean, These are seriously great people.
Every one of these nominees, and particularly a guy like Tillerson, needs a thorough hearing. The one thing we will insist on as Democrats is it not be just a quick, 5 minutes to each person in one day.
Well, the new Congress convenes next week, January 3rd, and then the week after that, the first of the confirmation hearings gets underway on January 10th and 11th with the Senate Judiciary Committee taking up the case of Senator Jeff Sessions. Let's take a look at the cabinet posts that have already been filled now. Only 2 vacancies remain, Agriculture and Veterans Affairs. And then looking at the list of billionaires on the cabinet picks thus far. Look at them all, the 4 of them there, and then the list of millionaires. If you're not a billionaire, you're at least a millionaire if you're in the Trump cabinet. Here are the list of millionaires. So what problems does this amount of wealth pose in the confirmation hearings? Nina, we'll start with you.
Well, it gives Democrats an opportunity to make a lot of noise, which they will. So I'll give you an example. Treasury Secretary nominee Steve Mnuchin took over a bank, IndyMac Bank, and will be accused by Elizabeth Warren and her allies of foreclosing on 36,000 families in California alone, for example. We'll hear a lot about that. We'll hear a lot of noise about the Labor Secretary from unions in particular do not like him. However, at the end of the day, it becomes a numbers game. I mean, you really need, because of the action by the Democrats, you only need a majority now. So you just need to hold your Republican ranks together. And I think the person with the problem there is Rex Tillerson, because he's got that one extra Republican in the committee, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and some Republicans have expressed concern about his relations with Putin. So, you really have to look at Republicans less than how much noise the Democrats are going to make.
Matt, Mr. Trump is going to get a hard lesson in the speed of government here, if
That's
only
right.
because of the wealth associated with so many of these people. There's so many forms to fill out.
Yeah, look, when I worked for President Bush, it took us a full year to fill out the sub-cabinet. This takes a very long time, and when you have so many wealthy people who haven't been in government, it's the 2 of those together, Doug, that are critical here. There's a lot of wealth. That means a lot of transactions to go to, and they haven't been through the process before. It's a different kind of vetting when you go into the government. I think you'll have these left-right confrontations like Jeff Sessions that I think will be fine, but at the end of the day, someone like Rex Tillerson, who not only has this vetting question, but he also has real concerns on the right. He's for a carbon tax, seems to be okay with the idea of climate change. There's questions about his positions on social issues, which are important to the base of the party. And then there's just this basic question of what are his foreign policy? What's his foreign policy philosophy? It's a lot of fronts to have opened up against you.
AB?
Yeah, I think Nina's right. I think that we'll hear a lot of protests from the Democrats, but in the end, they have among their ranks senators who are going to come out and vote with the Republicans on many of these picks. They're going to just pick their battles and maybe oppose 1 or 2. If you're up in cycle in 2018, it's just too risky to do more than 1 no vote. So they'll do their opposition research. They'll try to embarrass the nominees. They'll have sort of big shows at the hearings. But in the end, I don't think that they're going to cause a loss for any of these nominees. I would say, though, that they are right to demand scrutiny of people like Rex Tillerson. The fact that Senator Bob Corker, the chairman of the committee, has not required him yet, has not asked for his tax returns when he has all of this foreign business with foreign governments is absolutely ludicrous. This has been demanded of someone coming in as Secretary of State in other administrations, Democrat or Republican, and there's no reason that Rex Tillerson should be able to get away with being vetted without those.
There's only so much Democrats can do here, given the fact that this partial nuclear option remains in effect, a simple majority vote to confirm all of them.
That's right. We should all thank God for Harry Reid.
That's going too far.
No, it's the only time I'll ever say it, but it's true. I mean, he was warned at the time in 2013, the pendulum will swing. You've abolished the filibuster. I think in the end it's going to end up being used for the Supreme Court as well. I don't think that Trump and his people are going to allow the filibuster to prevent their nominee for the Supreme Court. That's essentially the big mandate that Trump has, and they're not going to squander it. And I think it's probably a good idea as a matter of policy, but nonetheless, there was a kind of vindictiveness on the part of Reid, and the Democrats deserve the blowback. I agree with AB. I think what the Democrats ought to do, you pick 1 or 2 nominees, maybe Price at HHS, so you have a fight on Obamacare, Pruitt on EPA, because then you have a fight on carbon. The Democrats will try to turn it into a religious test. Are you a believer in global warming? That's not the issue. Are you a believer in the Constitution, where EPA should administer the law and not make it? That would be a fight that Republicans, I think, should welcome and would win.
AB, you spend a lot of time up on the Hill, and you know that Mitch McConnell respects tradition and Senate tradition very, very much. Is there any scenario under which he would impose the full nuclear option for Supreme Court justices? He
doesn't want to talk about that now. And that's interesting that Charles says that Trump and his people are not going to allow a 60-vote requirement. We just don't know. He doesn't actually have a mandate. And so we don't know. They don't have a really strong majority. They might, in desperation, because they don't have the numbers, go with a nuclear option on Supreme Court picks. But they would probably rue the day one day as well. And I just don't know how much resistance Trump is going to face from those leaders, like McConnell, who's already come out and said in a rebuke to Trump, the way he's spoken about our intelligence officials, you know, the Russians are not our friends. McConnell's already pushed back on Trump. I expect him to continue to, so we just have no idea where that debate's going to go.
Matt, one thing we can say about all these cabinet picks is, or we can guesstimate, I should say, is that they will all have tremendous leeway in how they run their respective departments or agencies, because Trump really is evolving, at least at this point, into the tweeter-in-chief, and this is how he delegates authority.
I think, look, this is a very big philosophical question. Do they centralize the power over policy decisions in the West Wing, which the last two presidents have done, or do they allow these cabinet secretaries to roll with it? I was thinking, Doug, that the cabinet secretaries would have more autonomy, but after I see all these special advisors coming into the West Wing, I'm beginning to doubt whether that will happen.
20 seconds, Nina.
Well, I just think that there's a lot of strong personalities with strong positions, like Betsy DeVos at Education Department, who are coming in with who were going to have an agenda, and particularly Betsy DeVos on school choice. And so I think you will see active, visible cabinet secretaries.
Thanks for watching us tonight and inviting us into your home. That's it for Special Report. Fair, balanced, and unafraid. Tucker Carlson tonight with Ed Henry guest hosting up next.